to our second virtual ECIA and Hometown Pride workshop. Our topic today is trails planning and funding. Trails are a very popular topic. Recently, we did a survey of our Hometown Pride communities and asked them what they would be interested in learning more about and what they wanted more information on. And trails were a topic that came up very frequently. But trails also come up a lot when we do our different public input events, surveys in any community within our area. A lot of people say that they want trails, they want to have more trails in their community, and they want to learn more about trails. Since we've had this pandemic, we can't have any in-person meetings, so we're doing these series of workshops online. So this, as I mentioned, is our second. We are recording this, so it will be available on our website. And we're going to keep, I think we're not going to mute anybody if everybody can mute themselves, but if you have any questions, feel free to speak up during the presentation. Otherwise, we'll have time for questions afterwards, or if you have questions, you can also type them into the chat box and we'll try to answer them that way. So this is our second meeting. Our first was a presentation on REAP grants with Tammy Kressman from the Iowa DNR. We also recorded that presentation and we have her slides. We're going to be posting those on our website along with this video. We'll end up there soon. So if you're looking for any more information on that, you'll be able to find it there on the website. All right. So when we started talking about doing different presentations and Zoom meetings, I agreed to do a presentation on trails planning and funding. And when I actually sat down to put the presentation together, I had some difficulty in kind of narrowing it down because it's actually ended up being a pretty broad topic to discuss. But I was able to narrow it down to kind of three main topics. First, we'll start with some basics of trails. Then we'll talk a little bit about planning, trail projects, and then get into funding. This won't be a comprehensive presentation on all those topics. So if you do have questions or specific things you want to talk about, please stop me at any time and we can have that discussion. So first we'll start with some basics about trails. So the first thing that I want to discuss is kind of this concept that trails really exist in sort of an overlap area between the world of transportation and the world of recreation. So trails on the recreation side can be used for exercise, just a way to spend time with friends, and just an excuse to explore nature or get out and walk the dog. But they can also be used for transportation. So biking to work is one way that people use them. Or just kids walking to school or taking a trip to the store or farmer's market. So the reason I wanted to bring this up first at the beginning of the presentation is because it shows that trails are really multifunctional, and it kind of explains why they are so popular with people because, when you put in a trail, you're really benefiting many different types of people and many different types of users. But I also bring this up front because it becomes really important when we get into discussions of planning and funding trails. So on the planning side, we'll talk about who are the users that we're planning for, and what type of facilities do we want to put in to accommodate those different user types. Are we looking at recreational users who are going out for a weekend bike ride? Are we looking at commuters who are using the trail to get to work? Or is it kids that are using the trail to walk to school? So all those different types of users, and there's many different types of facilities that we can plan for to meet their different needs. It also becomes really important when we start talking about funding, because if there's different types of organizations that provide funding through grants, and we want to make sure that we are able to understand what the mission and the grant criteria of those different organizations are. So if they're a recreation organization, we want to be able to describe the recreational benefits of our project. But if it's transportation, we want to be able to show that people can use this trail for recreation and they can use it to get to their destination, whether it be work or school or whatever. So the next slide on trail basics, I want to talk a little bit about the bicycle and pedestrian network. So trails are most popular, and I think they're kind of the generic term that most people in the general public would use when they describe what they want. But trails are actually only a small piece of a much larger and more broad bicycle and pedestrian network. Um, so I want to be able to provide an overview of all the facility types that are included in that network. So that includes shared roadways, on-road bicycle routes, multi-use trails, single-use trails, sidewalks, and pedestrian crossing improvements. So I'm going to try to, I have a couple slides on each of these, and I'll go through each one. Um, and we'll be able to hopefully have an understanding of each facility type and be able to use them to kind of plan and piece together a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian network. So the first facility type that I have are shared roadways. So these are, many streets with low traffic volumes and low speeds do not require any improvements for safety for bicycle and pedestrians. So this includes a lot of our local residential streets, especially in our smaller communities. One example picture that I have is from Macokota, I believe, but it's a local residential street. Doesn't have a lot of traffic. Doesn't have a lot of high-speed vehicles going down it. And so really, there's not a lot that would need to be done on that street to make it safe for bicycles and pedestrians. So, the streets that we're looking at for shared roadways with very limited improvements would be streets that have less than 1,000 vehicles per day and vehicle speeds less than 25 miles per hour. Preferably 20 miles an hour or less would be great. But I also have some pictures here. There may be minor improvements needed to kind of direct more of a wayfinding directional improvement. Can be this. Let me see the pointer. So this type of improvement here, which is a shared lane marking on the street, sometimes called a sharrow. That just kind of shows people where the bicycle rights are, but doesn't really provide much protection for the bicyclist. And this is an example, is a photo it's actually from a town in Montana. But I think a lot of people would see the familiar scene in a lot of our residential neighborhoods, especially in smaller towns where there's no sidewalks on the side of the road, but a lot of people still do their walking and biking in the street because there's not a lot of traffic, and it's pretty safe to do so. So next we have on-road bicycle routes. So in situations where we do have a little bit more traffic and a little bit higher speed of travel, riding or walking in the middle of the street is probably not a safe situation. So what we can do is we can add some roadway improvements where the bicyclists would still be sharing the roadway with vehicle traffic, but we're adding some street design elements that can help protect those bicyclists and separate them from traffic. So generally what we're talking about here are streets with traffic of less than 6,000 vehicles per day and speeds 35 miles per hour or less. And then this could also include streets that have between 6,000 and 10,000 vehicles per day and streets with less than 35. Hi, Nick. Streets with 6,000 or 10,000 vehicles per day that have that can still have bicycle lanes, but we need some additional buffer or separation. So these, what we have here on the slide, are illustrations from the Federal Highway Administration Small Town and Rural Design Guide. So on the top is a paved shoulder. So this is going to be usually more of a rural situation alongside of a paved highway. But we actually just have pavement on the shoulder, offering a space for bicyclists to ride. There is an optional to have a buffer from the travel roadway if there's higher speeds and you need some additional protection. Standard bike lane. So the difference between the bike lane and paved shoulder is usually the surrounding context. So bike lane is typically more of an urban application. But again, we have a separated area that's designated for bikes and an optional buffer there. So the buffer can be wider or smaller depending on the traffic and the traffic volume and speed. And then if we need some additional separation, we could also have what's called a separated bike lane, where there's a bike lane. It's next to the roadway, but it's actually separated. It's on the other side of the curb. And so again, that just provides some additional protection for that bicyclist, right? But what we're looking at when we're looking at on-road bicycle routes, bicycle lanes, is really safety for the bicyclist that's there. So the general idea of these improvements that we're looking to put in is safety. Some safety strategies include some speed reduction, physical separation, or visual separation. So as speed and traffic increase, the need for separation increases. So the top illustration here just shows the results of studies that have been done that show the survivability of crashes. So if a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle that's going 25 miles per hour, they actually have an 89% chance of surviving that incident. But as the speed goes up, if it goes up to 35, that chance of survival drops to 68%. And when it has speeds go up to 45, that actually goes all the way down to 45 or 35%. So, and you can imagine as speed goes beyond that, that chance gets less and less. So that's why when we look at some of these design elements, we're looking at providing some additional separation based on the speed and the amount of traffic. So in our pictures here, you can see, this is low speed, low volume situation. You have a bicyclist and even a small child able to ride within the street. Then as the situation with, you can see that the roadway is a little bit more higher speed, larger roadway. This is actually one of those separated bike lanes where the bike lane is on the outside of the curb. And then an example from Dubuque, Northwest Arterial Trail, where there's actually a good amount of separation between the roadway and the trail. The Northwest Arterial is a location where we have speeds 55 miles per hour, probably greater in some situations. So again, we want to be able to provide extra separation and extra safety in that location. So with that Northwest Arterial Trail example, what that would actually is not really a bike lane, but we would actually consider that a multi-use trail. So this is a trail facility that's physically separated from vehicle traffic. It's used by bicyclists, pedestrians, and other non-motorized users. So that's why we call it multi-use. It benefits a wide range of users. It can be in its own right of way, as we see in the example up top. There's the trail, and it's actually within its own right of way, or it can be an existing road right of way with that Northwest Arterial Trail example, as we see in the bottom here. So we have a roadway. It's a highly traveled roadway with semi-large truck traffic, and so we have a good amount of separation in between that, and then we have the trail, but all within the same right of way. So usually when we're designing the multi-use trails, they are going to be 10 feet wide. But they can go down to 8 feet wide in most circumstances. So this multi-use trail is probably the most common type of trail, and probably what most people think of when they think of a trail and wanting to have a trail in their community. Now, from multi-use trails, we also have what I call single-use trails, where they're a more specialized use, usually more recreation oriented. They could be used for hiking, mountain biking, nature viewing, even equestrian trails are available in some locations. Usually these are going to be unpaved trails. They're going to be steeper and narrower. And because of that, they're going to require a higher level of physical ability. So these types of trails would not be as inclusive as a multi-use trail, multi-use paved trail. And so because of that, they're probably not going to be of much use for transportation. These types of trails are going to be primarily for recreational use. So again, in the photos, we have a couple examples. So Makokata Cave State Park, there's a trail here. It actually has stairs to go up and down, different elevations. Kind of similar situation here in the Mines of Spain recreation area in Dubuque, with not actual stairs, but some steps that have been built into a narrower nature trail. Mountain biking trails are becoming more and more popular. This is a picture from the Interstate Power Preserve mountain bike trail that's in Dubuque County. Um, these types of trails we've seen a lot of development of these trails in Dubuque County, but again, more recreational based and not really transportation. And then equestrian trails are another example. We don't have a lot of these in our area in eastern Iowa, but we do have examples. This is from a photo from the Iowa DNR. They do have several equestrian trails across the state. Some of them are associated with campgrounds, so you can ride your horse and go to the campground. So the next facility type we have are sidewalks. So sidewalks really provide really important walking connections, and they are probably the most common and most used part of the pedestrian network. You know, even people that are driving most places usually have to use a sidewalk at some point if they're going to get out of park their car, get out, and walk to whatever destination they're going to. So, you know, I would imagine that many people use a sidewalk on a daily basis. But there's some more difficulties with sidewalks. Typically, these are owned and maintained by private property owners, and those property owners can vary greatly in their ability or desire to maintain sidewalks. So this presents a challenge for a lot of communities. Uh, you know, the sidewalks are very important to the bicycle and pedestrian network, but you know they don't have the direct responsibility to maintain. So you know they are important, but they can present some challenges. So with sidewalks, overall sidewalks are pretty safe areas for pedestrians. But where we get into some challenges are where those sidewalks and trails for that matter cross streets. So, um, so overall, you know, even in these locations with sidewalks, where sidewalks exist or we have trails, you know, pedestrians can encounter dangerous situations at crossings. So there are many different facilities that we can install at those crossings to help and try to improve safety. Um, you know, that ranges from sidewalks, curb extensions, even median islands or pedestrian refuges. Again, these are some FHWA illustrations that I have here on the top. They show some crosswalks. In this situation, we have curb extensions. So that narrows down the distance that the pedestrian has to cross and where they could come into conflict with a vehicle. The other side here, we show a pedestrian refuge island where they only have to cross one lane of traffic, and they can stop and then cross the other when it's safe to do so. So in the illustration, you know, these appear to be concrete, pretty permanent pedestrian crossing improvements, but they don't have to be. The example on the lower left side here, we have some painted curbs that were installed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a location where they had some dangerous situations with crossing with vehicles. So instead of going, you know, they figured that it would take a long time to install a concrete curb extension here. So what they did is they just used paint and some of these plastic balls. So they were able to do that quickly and correct that situation and improve safety quickly. Then at some point when funding's available and when things are ready to go, they can go ahead and install a more permanent solution. Pedestrian crossing improvements also include curb ramps. So this is to help improve the accessibility and safety for people who are, you know, either have physical challenges or are visually impaired. So these are required by Americans with Disabilities Act crossing, and so they help improve accessibility and safety as well. Just a couple more pedestrian crossing improvements. The examples here. This example from the Iowa DOT. This is a painted crosswalk, but it's also raised a little bit. You can also see there's a bike lane in this situation as well. So what this improvement does is it, you know, provides that visual that this is a crossing place for pedestrians, but it also is, since it's raised, also works to slow down that vehicle traffic and help improve safety for pedestrians. Another example here of a pedestrian refuge island. This is not from our local area. This is from just a photo from the Iowa DOT, but we have done several of these projects, um, several near schools to help improve the crossing. So again, the pedestrian can cross one lane of traffic, uh, have a spot to take a break in the middle before crossing the other. So again, trying to improve that safety and improve the ability of pedestrians to cross safely. This is a local example from Dubuque. So these are just some Google Street View images, but this is Pennsylvania Avenue near Hempstead High School. This is actually a location where a student was hit by a vehicle and killed in 2007, I believe. And so at that time, this roadway was a 4-lane roadway with no, which was kind of provided a dangerous situation for students that were trying to cross the roadway over a highly traveled roadway to get to school. So what was done after that incident occurred was that the travel lanes were reduced from 4 lanes down to 3. So there's 2 lanes in each direction, or 1 lane in each direction, with a center median. Crosswalks were added, and also pedestrian crossing signals were added. So I wanted to include this in the presentation because when we get to talking about funding, we don't talk a lot about safety improvements, but if there is a situation like this where there has been an incident where there has been a pedestrian involved fatality or injury, safety grants do become a good option for making those improvements, and that's what was done here. The city of Dubuque used safety grant funding from the Iowa DOT to install these improvements. So that's all I have for the trail basics section. Now we get into the section about planning. And so I think this is an important step in the process of developing trails, even if it is one that people tend to like to skip over. People, city council members or people from trail advocates saying, we decided that we really want to have trails. We really like trails, and we want to talk about looking for funding. And usually, what I will say is that, what's your plan? This is an important step, and it's going to really help increase your chances of getting funding if you do have a plan that's already in place before you go for funding. So, some principles of planning bicycle and pedestrian networks. This is a list here that's provided by FHWA in their bicycle and pedestrian planning guide. But the first one is cohesion. So how is the network connected in terms of its concentration and destinations and routes? So does the network make sense? Can you get to the places you want to go? Directness. Does the network provide direct and convenient access to destinations? So one way that you can ensure that your trail facility is not going to be used is making it in some sort of roundabout way, and it's not a direct route between destinations that people want to get to. Accessibility. How does the network accommodate travel for all users regardless of age, income, or ability? So this gets back to our destination or our discussion of crossings, curb ramps, accessibility. And if we're going to be using this for transportation, it really needs to be accessible to all different types of users. Alternatives. Are there a number of different route choices available within the network? So are we providing only one access point to get people where they need to go, or are there multiple ways and multiple routes that people can choose to get to where they want to go? Safety and security. So does the network provide routes that minimize the risk of injury, danger, or crime? So again, this is what we were talking about with our on-street bicycle routes. Is there enough separation from high-speed traffic that's going to provide a safe situation for people that are riding on the road? Or do we need to look at providing a separated trail or something different? And then comfort. Does the network appeal to a broad range of ability levels, and is consideration given to user amenities? So user amenities can be things like trailheads, bathrooms, other amenities that users of the trail would want to use when they are out riding the trails. And then broad range of ability levels. So are we only considering the highly skilled bicyclists when we're planning our routes, or are we looking at people who are more casual riders and children? Are they also able to use the network that we are planning? So a couple of different examples we have here of planning a bicycle and pedestrian network. And this kind of starts to get at those different facility types and how we can combine them together to plan a cohesive network. So in the case on the left, we have a neighborhood location and we have kind of the town center. So to make the connection between those, we are kind of assuming here that both these locations, within those locations, you know, the residential street or the town center would be safe to use for bicyclists and pedestrians. But we need to make a connection here. So we have shoulder improvements, and then along with a side path, or what we call an on-street bike trail, to make that connection between those two destinations. Different situation here where we have a shared use path or a multi-use trail is kind of what the terminology we use. But we have residential neighborhoods, cul-de-sacs. We have a grocery store separated by a state highway. This location here, so we have different connectors from the residential neighborhoods to that trail, and then we have a improved crossing near the grocery store so that people can get across safely and get to the destination that they would like to get to. So when we start having the discussion on planning, people often ask, how much planning do we need to do? What level of planning do we need to have? So I think any level of planning is good to have, and will be better than having nothing. But I think there's different levels, and so starting out with the first level, the good level of planning, the kind of the basic level of planning you need to have for a trail project is a project plan. So a specific plan that includes a good cost estimate and just general information about the project. So that's kind of the first level, the most basic level, really the basic information that any grant application is going to ask for. Beyond that, better is to have a city level plan. So now we're starting to talk about the bicycle and pedestrian network to show how the project will connect to the city's existing and future bicycle and pedestrian network. So the best solution beyond that is a regional plan. So the project we show how the project is included in a county or regional plan. So show how the project connects not just within your own city, but between other cities and connects to a larger region. And then the very best is to show the connection between the state or national level bicycle and pedestrian system. So something, in our area would be like the Mississippi River Trail, the MRT. American Discovery Trail is another national level trail, or even just like something like the Heritage Trail, where it's more regional county level, but it also connects into some of those national level systems like the MRT. So other planning best practices, the main one is elected official support. We want to make sure that we have your city council, your mayor on board, or the county board of supervisors. Any support from elected officials is very necessary for any successful trail project. We also want to demonstrate public support. So is the public behind this project? Are they interested in seeing it completed? And we also want to make sure that in our plans for these things, we include maps and drawings that are able to allow people to visualize and see what the final product is going to look like and what that future bicycle and pedestrian network is going to look like. The next one is acquiring land before construction. So some of the grant programs that we'll talk about do provide funding for land acquisition. But if you're going to apply for a construction project, I would really recommend acquiring that land up front. The main reason being is that in Iowa, local governments are not allowed to use eminent domain to acquire land. So even if you think you'll be able to negotiate a deal with a landowner, if that deal falls through, there's really no other option for the city and to be able to continue that trail. So a application reviewer is going to look at your application. If you don't have that land acquired, they're going to see that as a risk in funding a project that may not be able to be completed because you may not be able to acquire that land at some point. So when we're talking about support from elected officials and from the general public, again, I think we have some different levels. So it's good to have letters of support, signed petition, or having people come and speak at public meetings. But really, the better and best way to show support is through financial commitment. So committed cash, land donated, in-kind services, people pledge, or even pledge volunteer hours from the community to really show that there is not only do people want these things, but they they really want it. They're really to put their money where their mouth is, and they are committed to seeing this project through to the end. And then the final planning best practice is to measure use. So if you have trails in place already, you can put out trail counters, or also have volunteers go out and do manual counts, just to measure the usage of those trails and make sure that they are being used, and that people, and that's just kind of another way to show support from the community, that people are voting with their feet, and they're out using those trail systems that have been put in place. So the example here, this is a automatic trail counter that was put in place at Feldman Park in Bellevue, that counts how many people cross the trail bridge on a daily basis, and helps measure the usage of that trail. So people, so if your community is in a place where they say, we want trails, we want to do a plan, but where do we start? How do we start developing that plan? Well, I think one of the best places to start is the Iowa DOT's bicycle and pedestrian long-range plan. So the long-range plan provides a good starting point. It also provides different facility descriptions, so kind of like what we just went through, except in a little bit more detail. It describes some design parameters. So, we talked about how trails should be at least 10 feet wide. So that type of thing is included in here. And it also has some information that can help you with selecting what type of facility is appropriate for your situation in your project that you have. So
hey, Dan,
yes.
Can I ask a quick question on your last slide?
Yep.
Does that apply to both trails that are with streets and trails that are separate? Would you use this? Okay.
Yep. So you'd use this for all types of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So not just those multi-use trails, it would be your bike lanes and whatever facilities you have.
Thanks.
So one of the things that's included in this plan is a facility selection matrix. So this may be a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but as we talked about, for on-street networks, there is a relationship in safety between vehicles per day, traffic volume, and then speed in miles per hour. So with these selection matrices, what you can do, either if the one on the left is for rural facilities and the one on the right is for urban. So if you have a street that you think you may want to put a bicycle lane on, and that there are 6,000 vehicles per day, and the speed limit is 30 miles per hour, you can use this matrix to come up and see what's the best solution there. And according to this chart, a bicycle lane may be a good option there. And it's kind of on the borderline between a regular bike lane and a separated bike. So this is just kind of a way to do early planning level analysis for what types of facilities we think should be located in specific locations. The plan also has some charts that help with cost estimates. So again, these are very rough planning level cost estimates. But I think they can be helpful in your initial planning stages and help you kind of gauge how much money we are looking at when we're doing our bicycle and pedestrian plans. So what this chart does is say, okay, we want to do a new paved multi-use trail, an independent alignment that's 10 feet wide. So the typical cost per mile for that type of facility would be $400,000. But then we have modification factors. So depending on different situations, you can apply a modification factor to that typical cost. So if we have a former railroad grade, so we know that the terrain has already been graded and flattened and is ready to go, that actually cuts the price in half. So we would multiply our 400,000 by 0.5, and so our typical cost per mile would be actually 200,000. But if we have some hilly terrain or terrain along a stream bank, that's going to increase our cost. We multiply it by 1.2. So that increases our cost per mile. And again, if we have an urban situation, urban retrofit, that would be, doubling the cost. So, within urban areas, that increases the cost by quite a bit. So then we have the similar things for other different types of facilities. So a paved side path along a roadway, new paved shoulders along a rural roadway, $175,000 typical cost, and then modification factors based on that. And then a shared lane road is probably the least expensive, $500 per mile if we're just looking at painting markings on the roadway. But if we're looking to add signage and the route includes turns on different roads, that would double the cost, and we'd be looking at about $1,000 per mile there. So again, these aren't going to replace your good engineering cost estimates, but again, good for planning level, gauging where you need to be with your plan. So our last section here is the funding section. So we've finally done all of our planning. We have our networks planned out, and now we need to look for funding for specific projects. So before we talk about funding, we'll get back to this discussion of the two worlds of trails, so recreation and transportation. So it's really important to understand what is the mission of the organization that we're applying. So some good application guidelines when we're looking at writing grant applications for trails. So the first is, what is the mission of the organization that is offering the grant? Is it transportation? Is it recreation? Or maybe it's something else? Is it an economic development organization, or is it something like public health? We have seen several projects funded from organizations that are looking to improve public health, and so that's another option as well. So we need to, first of all, keep this mission in mind when we're writing a grant application. And the application instructions will likely spell out the organization's mission and provide specific criteria that they are looking for when they're evaluating the application. So I think pretty much any application is going to have that pretty well spelled out. And so even if our application has multiple different benefits, we need to demonstrate how our application fits into the criteria that they spell out and how we can kind of tailor it to that specific program. So in some situations, though, the type of facility that we want to build and the purpose of that facility may determine which program we actually are going to apply for. So if we have a situation where we know that that we're looking at putting a mountain bike trail and there's not much transportation benefit associated with the project, we're going to kind of want to stay away from those transportation grant programs and really focus our time on those that are geared more towards recreation. So for grant programs, I wanted to talk about a few, and so these kind of show our sort of overlapping recreation and transportation worlds. So on the recreation side, we have REAP and we have the Land and Water Conservation Fund programs through the IODNR. And on transportation, we're going to talk about transportation alternative programs. So that's the regional and state level programs, and also the local program called the Regional County Transportation Program, or RCT. Then kind of bridging the gap in the middle is the state and federal recreational trails program that we'll discuss as well. So Transportation Alternative Program, also known as TAP. So these are federal funds that are administered by the Iowa DOT. So the purpose for these is transportation related. So you're going to fund transportation projects such as pedestrian and bicycle facilities, recreational trails, safe routes to school, community improvements such as historic preservation, vegetation management, and some environmental mitigation related to stormwater and habitat connectivity. So the Iowa DOT gets an allocation from the federal government every year. They keep back $1 million of that annually to administer a statewide TAP program. So that program, the deadline to apply for TAP is October 1st. And then that $1 million, those funds are really reserved for what they call projects of regional significance. So those projects that are included in the plan that show connections between different locations on a regional level is what they're looking to fund with those. Then they take the remaining dollars and distribute them out to NPOs and RPAs for regional TAP programs. So the regional TAP programs, these are more intended to fund more city level and local type projects. So within our area, we have the DMATS TAP program. So the DMATS area includes Dubuque, Asbury, Piasta, surrounding unincorporated areas. And so DMATS gets an allocation of about $185,000 a year in TAP funds. Then the DMATS board chooses when to open that application process based on funding availability. So since it's a relatively small amount of funding for transportation type projects, the DMATS board sometimes chooses to allow that funding to accumulate over a couple of years before they decide to open that application process. So the process was actually last opened in January of 2020. On the RPA side, so we have RPA 8 TAP program. So this includes Delaware and Dubuque County outside of the DMATS area and Jackson and Clinton County. So the RPA board receives $150,000 annually in TAP funds. So the RPA board, again, like the DMATS board, they can choose to let funding build up before they open the application process. So the TAP process was just recently opened in January 2020, and funding was given to trail projects in Dyersville and Macoka. So, and typically when, those TAP programs on both DMATS and RPA, they're not opened every year, but when they are opened, it's usually going to be for in the fall or over the winter is typically when they are open. It's ultimately up to the discretion of the board, and the DMATS and RPA organizations do try to notify everyone that would be eligible that those processes are open when they come open, but usually fall, winter time is usually when they are open. So the Rural County Transportation Programs, or RCTP. So Delaware, Dubuque, Jackson, and Clinton counties have grant programs that fund transportation projects in small cities. Each county makes $70,000 available annually, and cities can apply to up to $25,000. So the project eligibility does vary by county, but the program is primarily intended to fund street maintenance projects. So trails are generally not eligible for this program, but safety projects, especially those providing safe routes to school, are eligible. So things like crosswalks. We've had cities apply for some of the flashing beacons at pedestrian crossings. Those types of projects would be eligible. So really safety improvements. So safety improvements, including existing sidewalks, improvements to existing sidewalks, adding ADA ramps and crosswalks are eligible for the RCTP program. So next program we have the state recreational trails. So these are state funds that are appropriated by the state legislature in Iowa. The program is administered by the Iowa DOT. So this is kind of an in-between program between recreation and transportation. So recreational projects are eligible, but again, administered by the Iowa Department of Transportation. The application deadline for this program is July 1st. So if you're thinking about applying, for this round, you might want to get to work on that application. So the purpose of the program is acquisition, construction, or improvement of recreational trails. So again, this is one where you can apply for construction of a trail, but also there are funds available for land acquisition as well. Available funding. So for FY 2021, in the recent legislative session, the legislature approved $1 million for the program. This is down from 1.5 million, but the legislature is anticipating reduced funding available due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So they reduced that funding there. So if you want more information on the program, there's a link there that you can click on and go to the Iowa DOT's website once you get this presentation. Federal Recreational Trails is a similar program to state recreational trails, but it is federal funds that are administered by the Iowa Department of Transportation. So with this program, things that they're looking to fund are trail maintenance, purchase and lease of construction and maintenance equipment, construction of new trails, acquisition of easements or property for trails, and the operation of educational programs to promote safety and environmental protection related to trails. So that those educational programs are only limited to 5% of the state's total funds. The deadline for federal recreational trails is October 1st. The amount that's available is about $1.3 million. That's what was available in FY 2020. And again, there's a link there for some additional information from the Iowa DOT's website. REAP grants. So I won't spend a lot of time discussing REAP grants since that was the subject of our last Zoom meeting. But again, this program is administered by the Iowa DNR. Deadline to apply is August 15th. And in Dubuque County, at least, I know the county still has a county level REAP meeting the week before that, where projects that cities are looking to apply for need to be included in that county level REAP plan before they can apply at the state level. So that's something to be aware of there. 100% funding, no match required. So there are several different REAP programs, but what we're looking at trails is going to be the city parks and open space grant. So that's 50% of all REAP funds. Grant categories are based on city population, so which is kind of nice. So small cities don't have to compete with the larger cities. The maximum amount grant request is based on the 2010 census population. So there's a chart there. City and the maximum amount you can apply for as a city is based on your population. And in the recent session, the legislature allocated $12 million to the program for FY21, and they also were able to extend the program. So the REAP program was set to sunset after this year, so they extended it for additional 2 years to 2023. Another recreation program available through the Iowa DNR is called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So these are federal funds that are administered by the Iowa DNR, and the purpose of the program is to provide support for acquisition and development of outdoor recreation. So this is 50% funding program, so you do have to have 50% local match. The deadline to apply is March 15th, and eligible projects include really a wide range of recreation projects, but on the trail side, it includes observation and sightseeing facilities, including hiking, biking, equestrian, cycle, snowmobile, and nature trails. So really more on the recreational side of those trails, not really looking to provide much transportation function. So as far as funding that's available, there was $620,000 was available statewide in 2015. I don't have any more recent numbers than that. I did send an email to the grant administrator, and I am hoping to get back some more recent information on this program. But one thing about the LWCF program is that it has been in place since 1964. And so they have a state map on the website that shows where all the projects that have been funded through this program. And it's pretty extensive across the state. I don't know if you can see on the map that I have there, but the little blue dots are all projects across the state in our region in Eastern Iowa where Land and Water Conservation funding has been used to develop various projects over the last number of years. So those are the primary transportation and recreation funding sources that are available for trails. There are a wide range of other types of funding sources that are available that can be used to develop different trail projects. And the reality is that most projects that are developed are going to be using multiple different funding sources. So I don't think it's realistic to think that you can just apply for a state rec trail or a REAP grant and think that that's going to be all the funding you need. So other funding sources that are available that have been used on projects in the past, DRA, Dubuque Racing Association, they have grant funding that is intended for helping local communities. So they've provided funding for trails. Wellmark in the Iowa Department of Public Health. So again, these are organizations that have provided funding for trails based on their benefits for public health. So getting people out, letting them exercise. So again, if you're applying for those, make sure you play up those benefits of your project. And then again, local businesses for private fundraising. These are options. A lot of, again, trails are very popular. Local businesses local people who are looking to donate money to projects, um, and this includes the community foundations as well, are very receptive to donating money to these projects as long as you have a good plan in place and you're able to show that this was going to be a project that benefits the community. County conservation boards and conservation organizations are also a good place to look. They are going to be looking to improve recreation in the area, so recreational trails are a good option and a good place to look there. The last item I added here is Iowa DNR does have funding programs, I believe, for ATV trails. It's not something that I know a lot about, but there are programs available, and these types of trails have been gaining popularity in recent years. So that's another option to look for as well, if that's the type of trail you're looking to develop. Finally, I have one example here to show how funding can be broken down into different sources on a project. So this example is the Feldman Park Trail Bridge in Bellevue, Iowa. So the project connected trails in Feldman Park to trails in the Bellevue State Park across the street. So different funding sources are available. We had Parks to People, which is a program that we don't have funding for anymore, but that funded a large chunk of it. Then there, from the Iowa DNR, we had REAP funds, Iowa DOT, State Recreational Trails Fund, the City of Bellevue keeping a large amount. And we had amounts from the DRA, Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque, Bellevue State Park provided some funding, Black Hills Energy, Fidelity Bank, and other private donors. So in total, that project was a $1.2 million project, but the funding was spread across several different sources that made that project. So lastly here, at the end of the presentation, I just have some additional resources, and a lot of these were resources that I used in development of this presentation. So the Iowa DOT's Bicycle and Pedestrian Long Range Plan, Small Town and Rural Design Guide, Facilities for Walking and Biking from the FHWA. That's a really good resource, and a lot of the illustrations that I used in this presentation came from there. And then the Iowa DOT's Guide to Transportation Funding Programs. So this is just a guide that summarizes a lot of different programs that are available for transportation funding, including trails. So another good resource there. So that is what I have for the presentation. So I guess we can open it up now for any discussion or any questions that people may have.
There are a couple of questions in the chat box if you want to look.
Okay, let me see. 2 chat box questions.
Can you do that, or do you want me to tell you?
Yep, I got them here.
Okay.
So, so the first question here is, do you foresee any new funding coming down the pike because of COVID, since more people are wanting to get outside and to get outside for outdoor recreation? I don't have any specific insights into funding that's coming available for trails because of this. I do think that trails have become a lot more popular during the pandemic, and I think there's going to be more demand for trails funding because of that. So no specific insights on funding, but I think there definitely will be more demand for trail funding moving forward. The next question is LWCF, Land and Water Conservation Fund. Does it also fund splash pads? And yes, I believe it does fund splash pads. I would think I know it funds swimming facilities, so like swimming pools, beaches, things like that. The only grant that I've ever worked on from this program was for a swimming pool. So I would imagine that splash pads would be available, but we need to confirm that for sure.
Hey Dan,
right,
can you talk a little bit more about safe routes to school and where is that pot of money? Who makes the local decisions? I mean, is it locally controlled or is it a state program that you apply for?
So as far as the pot of money for safe routes to school, is where it's gone is that it's gone. It doesn't really exist anymore. It was a federal program probably about 10 years ago that was started, where there was dedicated funding source for safe routes to school projects. And communities could apply for that funding directly. I believe it was federal funds that were administered by the state. But at this point, there's no dedicated funding source. But those Safe Routes to School type projects are eligible for TAP funding. So if you had a regional level project, you could apply for the statewide TAP program, or you could apply through DMATS or RPA for a Safe Routes to School project. You can also apply for Safe Routes to School projects through the RCTP program. Those projects that are providing safety for schools generally tend to rank pretty well through those programs as well. So no dedicated funding source, but there are still ways to find funding for those projects.
So am I to believe then that different regions might treat it differently? And the question came up when I was in Jones County, particularly in Monticello, and obviously they have a different Council of Governments and transportation planning than we have in our area, but might they not put anything aside for Safe Routes to School?
So for TAP funding, which I think we'd be talking about with at the RPA level, Safe Routes to School projects are eligible to apply for that funding. But ultimately, the decision of what gets funded and what projects get funded are going to come down to the RPA board. They are the ones that make that decision. So I guess in our RPA here, there's no set aside funding specifically for Safe Routes to School projects, but communities can apply for those funds for those different projects, and they are ranked alongside the other TAP applications that we get.
Thanks.
Yep. Anything else? Any other questions or discussion?
I assume your PowerPoint will also be made available for
Yep,
those of us.
I think our IT person at ECIA is back today. So I think he will be able to post this video and the presentation up on the website sometime soon. So once that's up there, we will let you know where it is, and you can go ahead and download it from there.
Thanks.
All right. If there's not any other questions, I guess we can just go ahead and wrap up then. I guess one last thing I would ask is that, we've done 2 of these sessions so far. And, I would just ask people if there's interest in doing more. I think it has been helpful, and it's a good way for us to continue to connect and help our communities during a pandemic. But, are there any more specific topics that you would like to hear about? Any experts that you'd like us to try to get? You can email me or Jennifer or Marla, and we can try to continue that and schedule more of these sessions. So with that, I guess we'll just go ahead and wrap up, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one of these.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.